I thought I would call this my June on the Range Roundup. So I kicked off the month of June with June on the Range. It is a month-long celebration of Westerns. And because I don't read Westerns, the only Western I have read so far, well, before this month, was True Grit. And I loved it. I loved that book, so I did want to explore more. But Westerns are out of my comfort zone, and so this was something a little different for me. I did post a video earlier about my son having Westerns on his shelf. He loves Western. He enjoys reading them. And so I pulled a few from his shelf and I tried them. And I'm so glad that I did. This is June on the Range is hosted by Michael K. Vaughn. I'll leave a link to his video below, his announcement video. He and several others are hosting this readathon, and there are also some book tags and things going around that are really fun too. And so I hope that you'll check out some of the June on the Range related videos. But I am finished with my June on the Range attempt, and so I thought I would call this my June on the Range Roundup so that we could kind of talk about the books that I tried in the Western genre. So the only thing that was really a prompt for June on the Range was to read a Western, anything Western related. But when Michael announced this, he said just, you know, read a Western themed book, but also he gave us an easy prompt of read a Zane Grey and read a Louis L'Amour, and then read two others that weren't Zane Grey or Louis L'Amour. So I tried to do that. So the first one, well, let me just warn you, several of these were DNFs for me. I did enjoy it, and I found some really diamonds in the rough, but there were some that I didn't like. The nonfiction was a fail for me. I tried The True Story of an American Outlaw, Butch Cassidy, and I read maybe 2 chapters and I stopped. It just wasn't for me. I like the idea of, it started out with the end of the gang. I think they were called the Wild Gang or something like that. What were they called? The Wild Bunch or the Wild Gang or something. I can't remember. But anyway, his gang, they started with the last member, which was actually a woman, and her history, a little brief history. So I did like the way that they started at the last one surviving member of this gang, and the way that she kind of worked into the gang and how she was associated with it. But it was just too much other stuff, and I was trying to learn about Butch Cassidy. Another thing that I didn't like about it was the way he was narrating the story, the way he was telling me. It just didn't motivate me to want to pick this up. And so after a couple of chapters, I thought, I'm just not enjoying this. I don't like the way that he's telling the story. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in Butch Cassidy, because I am. So if you know of a good Butch Cassidy nonfiction, let me know. But this one, the way that he told the story, I just wasn't interested. So I thought, well, my son had mentioned this one, The Lifetimes and Treacherous Death of Jesse James by Frank Triplett. So I thought, well, I'll pick it up and start reading it. Well, I did start reading it, and then I realized that this was actually an account right after the death of Jesse James. The man that wrote this was friends with Jesse James's sister and wife. I think that's the story of this. And so he wrote it a long time ago, and this has just been reprinted. Well, as I was reading it, it seemed like, I don't know if he was trying to defend Jesse James, because at the very beginning it seems more like he's a little more saintly than what I am accustomed to hearing about Jesse James. And it may be a great book, and it may be all truth. I don't know. But when I read that this was an account given to him by his sister and mother, I just wasn't sure if I was going to get an objective account of Jesse James. And that kind of dampened it for me. And again, the way he was telling the story, I just wasn't interested. Let me know though if it is worth the read, because I might go back to that one. I'm not sure if I'll go back or not. again, it wasn't very exciting for me the way he was telling the story. If you do know of one, I know I read one years ago. It was a very short little, I think it was for middle grade, which is probably more my level, on Jesse James. And I think that somebody told me when I mentioned this one that there was a really good one on Jesse James. If you did, re-comment, because this one just seemed too much swayed in one direction. I want an objective historical account of Butch Cassidy as well as Jesse James. So let me know in the comments if you know of one. So anyway, I didn't read those because I have too many books on my shelf to read things that I'm just not interested in reading. So those were DNFs. One more DNF was the Hopalong Cassidy. This was called The Coming of Hopalong Cassidy. I started this and was not into it at all. It is the typical Western, I don't know, sorry to say, but manly kind of book. I'm just not interested in that. So from the beginning, I was just like, okay, no, I feel like this is not for me. So as I did read, you know, a couple of chapters and tried to get into it. Didn't like the whole premise of the story and the way it was being told. So unfortunately, this was a DNF as well. But then I read a Newbery Award winner. It was a winner in 1927, and it is called Smokey the Cow Horse, and I did enjoy this one. Now, it wasn't my favorite Newbery or favorite middle grade or anything, but I did enjoy reading it. This one is about Smokey, who is a cow horse, and it's about his life and his when he meets different people, when he teams up with different people throughout his life, and what his jobs are as he goes through his life as a horse. And I found it to be fun and interesting. There was, it is a little dated. Of course, it was written in 1926 because I think it won in 1927. So it is dated. However, it reminded me a lot of Black Beauty. And I thought, if you've read Black Beauty, you know, that's set in London, and Black Beauty's life, you know, in London and on the along the countryside. This one is a Western version of that. I think of little boys from the 1920s loving this Smokey as more of a Black Beauty version of the Wild West. So that if you enjoy Black Beauty, you may well enjoy this one. And if you enjoy, you know, horses and the Wild West, this was a fun one to read. So I did read that one, and I did enjoy that. And then I read a Zane Grey, and I must say I was so surprised at how much I enjoyed this. I could not stop reading. So I do want to read more Zane Grey. This is called The Mysterious Rider by Zane Grey. And this is my son's book. I borrowed it from him. This is the one that he told me to read. He said, you'll enjoy this one, just read it. So I'm so glad that he chose my read, because he's right. I loved it. This is like a Western romance. There is a woman named Columbine, and it's about her situation with her father. But the man that is raising her, who she calls her father, is not her real father. He found her and raised her, and so she feels, you know, obligated to him to do what he tells her to do as she gets older and becomes an adult. So there's this struggle with her wanting to honor her father and be loyal to her father because of him, you know, sacrificing and raising her, but also on the other side of that, what she wants out of her own life. So there was a great premise to this, with Columbine trying to come to terms with how to honor her father and chase her own dreams, kind of thing. And then, as the title suggests, there is a mysterious person who rides into town and changes things. And his part in the story changes everything. And I really like the way that his story went too, and how it blended with Columbine's story. So I loved this one. I loved his description of the setting, how he told the story. I was so impressed with his writing style. From the beginning, from the first page, he had captured my attention. He set up the story very well, and he gave me such great descriptions of the area and where we were in the story. So I am highly impressed with Zane Grey, and I love The Mysterious Rider. And if you want to dip your toes into a Western, I suggest The Mysterious Rider because it was fantastic. And then I picked up the audio version of Louis L'Amour. I had mentioned that my son had told me about Willie Nelson narrating some Louis L'Amour short stories. So I picked that up and I listened to, I think it was called Writing for the Brand. I loved it, and I am definitely interested in listening to more of those short stories because I think it's a whole collection that I've downloaded. But I've only listened to that one, To Fulfill the June on the Range. It was fantastic. It was narrated by Willie Nelson, and then Johnny Cash, Chris Christopherson. There's a lot of people that I recognize their voices. They have those distinct voices that you would recognize, and I loved that they were sort of performing this short story. And the story itself was great. The premise was great. So I do look forward to listening to more of those in that Louis L'Amour collection. If you know of a Louis L'Amour that you think I would enjoy, let me know in the comments. I know a couple of you mentioned some in the last video about June on the Range, and so I'll go back and I'll try to find those too, because I do want to start looking for those when I'm out and about at secondhand bookstores and things. So I did enjoy Louis L'Amour's writing as well. Again, I was listening, and I think that this might have been more of a performance driven, but I did enjoy that story too. So I am pleased with that because I did love the Zane Grey and the Louis L'Amour. So that gives me hope for maybe I will enjoy the Western genre after all. And then I read one more because the prompts were to read a Louis L'Amour, check, Zane Grey, check, I did that. And then two that weren't Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey. So I read Smokey and the Cow Horse. I needed one more, and one of you mentioned this. You reminded me that I had this book, so thank you for reminding me. And that is The Lady's Mind by Francine Rivers. So I read this one too. I enjoyed this one, but it wasn't my favorite Francine Rivers. It was a lighthearted read. It was a lot different than what Francine Rivers writes, and I did enjoy that about it because I was looking for just a lighthearted Western type book, and this was more of a lighthearted, fun read. But it wasn't my favorite Francine Rivers. One of the things is because it's Christian fiction. Now, I know that we can be so critical as Christians when we're reading Christian fiction. So I try not to be so critical of these things. However, if you are publishing in the Christian publishing, that is a higher standard. Whether you like it or not, you are setting yourself up for critiques at a different standard, because Christian publishing, there are expectations there. And there are expectations about the way that you handle sexual topics, the way that you handle violence, the way that you handle anything. You are going to handle it in a way that brings people closer to Christ. So that is your objective as a Christian writer. If you're not sharing faith throughout the book, if you're blurring the lines between what is permitted in Christian and what is not, you're setting yourself up for failure as a Christian writer. I mean, that's just how it is. And so in this one, although I didn't think there was anything bad in this story or anything like that, I didn't appreciate, there was, okay, at the end of this, well, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it is a romance. And so there is a couple that gets married. Well, in most Christian romances, they get married and that's the end, because we don't want to know what they do after they get married, Well, this one goes past that, and it gives us a couple of scenes of them, it's closed, but it's a little more than what you expect from Christian publishing. And it just rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't think that it was offensive, or it didn't bother me in that way. It was just because it is labeled Christian fiction. And it's like, why do you need to go there? Why do you need to do that? And I don't know. I feel like it's almost like I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you that we can do this in Christian publishing. But why? What's the point of that? Why would you want to do that? So it just rubbed me the wrong way. I loved the story itself, the premise, the way she told the story. Again, it was lighthearted. It was fun. It was predictable, but I enjoyed it. It was just that last part that made me think, not so much. I don't want this in Christian fiction. Now, you can disagree with that, and you can, say, well, they should have those things. Well, coming from someone who's worked in Christian publishing, there are guidelines and boundaries, and they're there for a reason, because if you are a person who reads only Christian fiction, you have expectations. And so if you put other things in there, I think that that's false advertisement. Now, again, there's nothing in here that did that. It was just, to me, getting there. It was things that just weren't necessary to include in this book. So that is my rant for that. So those are the books I read for June on the Range. I had a fabulous time. I will be trying more Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey. If you know of any other Westerns that you think I would be interested in, leave those in the comments below. Let me know if you've read any of these as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.